Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Steel Mint Engage 2.0, a 5-day webinar series which would cover a gamut of topics ranging from iron ore, coal, scrap, steel, ferroalloys, and graphite electrodes. Engage 2.0 aims to reach out to industry leaders and understand their perspective on topics identified for discussion and enable our clients to have a better understanding on how each sector is likely to pan out in the near future. My colleague Nitish Shukul and I, Madhumita Mukherjee, editor Steel Mint, will take this webinar forward this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We also take this opportunity to thank our esteemed sponsors for the event, NMDC and JSW Steel. This afternoon, our topic for discussion is the Indian steel market outlook in H1 FY'23. And joining us in this discussion are our guest of honor, Madam Ruchika Chaudhry Govil, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Steel, Government of India, and our keynote speaker, Mr. Alain Legrix, Director and Vice President, Sales and Marketing at AMNS India, and Vice President at ArcelorMittal. But before we do some forecasting, let us see how the year we left behind was. Very briefly, calendar 2021 was marked by several ups and downs for Indian steel mills. The Chinese export rebate cancellation was a major influencer. The second COVID surge and ensuing oxygen crisis stifled crude steel production for a month. Even as output bounced back, renewed post-lockdown industrial activity led to a sudden mismatch in power demand and generation, leading to domestic power shortfall, which was subsequently alleviated by increased coal production by Coal India. Indian mills exhausted and exceeded their Europe export quotas in the first 5 months of the year to stay afloat during the Delta surge, while the European Commission extended safeguard measures for another 3 years. Auto production was hit by the semiconductor shortage, while mills intermittently raised prices in tandem with their export prospects. Nitish will now make a brief presentation to give further details on the Indian steel industry. Over to you, Nitish.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Please allow me to share my screen.
Yeah.
Right. So good afternoon, everyone. So just to set a context, right? So the National Steel Policy of 2017 aims at achieving two major objectives, right? One is to build a globally competitive, Indian steel industry with a crude steel capacity of 300 million tons by 2030-31, and also to increase the per capita steel consumption to 160 kgs by 2030-31. Now looking at the first slide on the company-wise crude steel production, if we can observe in calendar year 17, we witnessed India clocking roughly about 100.71 million tons of crude steel production, which has increased to about 115.68 million tons in CY21. A growth of about 14.81 percentage.
Sorry, Nitish, I'm interrupting. Your slides are not moving. Yeah, better.
Yeah, it's better. Thank you. Right. So, in CY21, Tata Steel Limited's crude steel production stood at roughly about 18.92 million tons, followed by Salle at about 17.32 million tons, and JSW clocked 16.57 million tons. Looking at AMNSI, AMNSI's crude steel production stood at around 7.39 million tons, closely followed by JSPL at 7.32 million tons, and RINL at 5.52 million tons. Moving to the Indian steel consumption. So, India's steel consumption has seen a significant growth in the last 5 years. Steel consumption has increased from 79.63 million tons in CY17 to around 98.39 million tons in CY21. So that's a whopping growth of roughly about 23.5%, right? So, and also, the per capita consumption of steel has increased from 57.6 kgs to 74.1 kgs during the last 5 years. And the government has clearly defined objectives of increasing the rural consumption of steel from the current 19.6 per capita to roughly about 38 kgs per capita by 2030-31. Moving to slide 3, the national steel policy aims to make India a net exporter of steel by 2025-2026. Indian steel exports stood at roughly about 20.63 million tons in CY21, as against 14.99 million tons in calendar year 17. So this translates to an increase of roughly about 37.62%. And some major countries where India looked out for exports were Italy, which stood at 2.1 million tons in CY21, Nepal, which stood at 1.99 million tons in CY21, Belgium, which stood at 1.82 million tons in CY21, Vietnam, which stood at 1.55 million tons in CY21, and China, which stood at roughly about 1.33 million tons in CY21. Moving to the Indian steel exports. So, clearly the government of India has taken measures to ensure that, steps are taken to develop India into a self-sufficient, cost-efficient, and globally competitive manufacturing industry. So India's dependency on steel imports has, come down in the last 5 years. In calendar year 17, the steel imports stood at 6.9 million tons, which has come down to about 3.94 million tons in calendar year 21. So that's a drop of roughly about 42.89%. A point to be noted here is that South Korea has consistently topped the charts as far as imports are concerned in the last 5 years. In calendar year 21, the imports from South Korea stood at roughly about 2.09 million tons, as per the data available with Steelman. And that's it from my end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nitish, for that very succinct presentation. I now invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Alain Legrix. Mr. Legrix is Director and Vice President, Sales and Marketing at AMNS India and Vice President at ArcelorMittal. Mr. Legrix joined ArcelorMittal in 1985 and has held various leadership roles across the group and in a range of key divisions, including ArcelorMittal's automotive business, international sales, and distribution. In his most recent role, prior to joining AMNS India, he was appointed Head of Business Transformation at ArcelorMittal Europe Flat Products. A warm welcome to you, sir. The screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. And thanks to give me the opportunity to do the opening of this conference. I will focus my speech on the outlook for the Indian steel market for the short and medium term, but difficult to speak about India without talking about the macro view and the Russian and Ukraine events. So I suggest to split my presentation in 3 parts. First, I will speak about the global and the macro view. Second, even if the situation is moving day after day, and even if we don't know for how long the events in Ukraine and Russia will last, what do we make out of the Russian and Ukraine events? And third, I will come to India and the steel business in India. So first, when looking the supply demand overall on the macro view, World Steel Association is planning a growth of the steel demand of around 2% for CY22. 2% growth means, except if I am wrong, plus or minus 40 million ton growth in steel demand. Most of the continent should experience positive growth. US and Canada should not be impacted by the energy and the cost crisis that we are seeing today in Europe. So overall, the GDP forecast should not be too much impacted directly by the current events. In EU, World Steel Association was planning something close to 5% growth in steel demand for CY22. But the balanced supply demand will be, of course, highly impacted with more effect on the supply side than on the demand side. Turkey is certainly a concern as they import a lot in terms of energy, gas, and steel. The hit from Russia and Ukraine events should be high for them. Turkey also has a lot of external debt in dollar, which will impact them. When I go to Brazil, Brazil exports a lot of food. They export a lot of products which are in fact similar than the ones exported by Russia, including steel. In terms of steel, they do not have so much room to do more on export market. On slab, ArcelorMittal is exporting from Brazil and from Mexico, but we have just started our new hot strip mill in Mexico, so less slab availability to expect from LATAM origin. Russians will get the benefit of the low ruble, but not so easy for them to export except Europe via their east side. As we know, Russia exported last year plus or minus 30 million tons and Ukraine 15 million tons. So total, it's about 45 million tons when China did 65 million tons, just to put in perspective the weight of these three countries. So if we take as an assumption that China will remain stable with its export, I will come back on this later on, we have in fact a double effect on the supply demand. On one side, with the demand, we have overall 2% growth, meaning there's 40 million tons, which is relatively conservative, even if there are some risk in Europe. And on the other side, the supply, which will be short by roughly 45 million tons, when we just take the Russian and the Ukraine exports. So overall, there is a gap created between supply and demand. What we have seen globally in CY21 is first a recovery of the real demand and a restocking phase, but leading to a tight supply-demand balance. We have also seen some records with the spreads in terms of pricing. Inventories now are replenished, and the real demand continues to recover with significant potential from automotive segment. For CY22, business environment should remain strong, but we will have to evaluate the impact of the Russian and Ukraine events on the demand side. Today, it is too soon to estimate this, as a lot will depend on the duration of the conflict. But the weighted PMI forecast for 2022 should nevertheless remain good. We are still expecting a rise in apparent steel consumption of 2 to 3% globally. Before I comment on Russian-Ukraine events, I would like to make a specific comment on the decarbonization challenge. We are living in a world of disruption. We had the COVID, we have now the Russian and Ukraine events, and we have ahead of us the decarbonization challenge. All countries have announced some aggressive targets. EU, for instance, will go fast on this. In the ArcelorMittal Group, we have defined targets to reduce CO2 emission by 25% by 2030. And on this, ArcelorMittal Europe has on its side defined a target to reduce by 35% by 2030. So a lot of investment to come in new technologies to adapt our industrial footprint. But when most of the EU players are going aggressively on this, it will mean, for instance, more scrap to be used. EU will be no longer an exporter of scrap. The scrap market and the scrap flows will change. We need to keep in mind that India is importing 7 million tons per year globally. Second, EU steel players will pay also for the carbon tax and will also implement the border carbon tax adjustment. It means that EU export will be less competitive but also some issues to come for our Indian steel product to be exported to EU. Our customers, also when doing business with EU, will be impacted. Indian manufacturers, our customers, will require more and more what we name green steel. So one of our challenges in India is to accelerate and to develop green steel. This to support our customers, for them to continue to remain competitive on export markets. In the steel segment in India, we are all working on this currently. Now, let me come to Russia and Ukraine events. We have in ArcelorMittal a plant in Ukraine, in Kryvyi Rih. We have mines, and we produce long product with 22,000 people. So, of course, it is a major concern to us. Some plants in EU are now impacted as they are sourcing part of their raw material from Ukraine. I cannot list all the impact with these events, but just to mention a few points for the steel business. First, we have a disruption in EU with higher energy costs. This is and will impact many industries. Second, we have a major disruption in EU with the raw material sourcing flows, increasing, of course, the raw material basket cost for EU steel producer, but also indirectly all others like us in India. We have also ahead of us a disruption in steel flows. Russia exports, as I said earlier, roughly 30 million tons of steel, on which 50% is in semi with billet and slabs. Ukraine, with 21 million ton crude steel production, export 15 million tons. On this, 6 million tons are also in billets. So overall, you have 21 million ton export of semi, which are at stake. Could be not a problem when China absorbs the Russian part, but overall, for sure, this will create distortions. In flat product, there are two parts. First, the slabs. Russia exports 9 million tons, on which 50% is going to EU and Turkey. And Ukraine is exporting 3 million tons, mostly to EU and Turkey. So overall, we have almost 7 million ton slabs, which are going usually to EU and Turkey. And on flat product outside slabs, Russia and Ukraine export to EU and Turkey plus or minus 9 million tons per year. So we have also to integrate that we have to add the potential reduction of capacity in EU due to the cost and the supply effect. Some mills will be less competitive, reducing their production due to the cost impact. So overall, and to make it short for the supply side for Europe, slab plus finished flat imports from Russia and Ukraine account for more than 10% of the total demand in Europe. On the demand side, we can expect, of course, some impact in Europe. Consumer confidence will be impacted. Some segments, such as auto, could have some impact. So I think that the main message is we have disruption with these events, and the impact will not be limited to Europe. The uncertainty with our business in steel remains China. And what will they really do in terms of export? China has a lower domestic demand, as we know, so the temptation to go back on export and to increase their export is there. And we have seen that currently they are increasing their export. They have, of course, the potential to substitute most of the Russian export, but this will depend also on how Europe will manage the quota issue. So when I come to India, structurally, the growth in India is there and will be there, of course, but we think that we will see different speed or dynamic. Infrastructure is strong, very strong. There are many ongoing projects. Tenders have been reactivated. A lot of things to come. And in AMNS, we have clearly seen this during these past months with the structure of our order book in place. Looking ahead for the 6 coming months, the pull is very strong from this segment. Construction is also well-oriented. We see this with many segments which are much stronger now than previously. One of them, for instance, is the pipe and tube segment, so which is pulling again very strongly. Besides this, we can say that the topic in construction is more on how to promote and use more steel. This is more medium and long term, of course, but the perspective for steel in construction is very important. We see some acceleration and development in the construction segment with our pre-paint steel business, with the construction of data center, warehouses, or in the cold storage segment. Auto is and will remain, we think, structurally strong. The forecasts from our customers for the 6 coming months are good, being in passenger vehicle or commercial vehicle segment. In AMNS, as you know, we are working currently on our growth plan. We have some expansion plans which have been launched in our plant in Azira. All this will be there by end of 2024, early 2025. The challenge or the uncertainty in auto is, I think, more with the e-mobility. We expect a strong push with the 2 and 3 wheelers and with buses, but on the passenger vehicle segment, this will take, of course, much more time. So overall, demand recovery is there, and all our customers, I think, are pretty aggressive in terms of expansion plan for domestic, but also on the export market. For India, I think that the challenge is going to be, first, what will be the level of export from the Indian mills due to the gap created in Europe and the attractivity of Europe in terms of pricing. The second topic is what will be the level of export from China, as I said earlier. And third, what will be for India the impact coming from the energy and raw material cost. So I'm going to try to do a comment, but I will focus only on flat part as we are operating in this segment. On the question of export, we don't know yet how Europe will manage the quota issues, but quota or non-quota will of course influence a lot the international market price in the coming months. Indian mills will benefit, of course, of this situation for their export. Same with China, they will get benefit of this. But I think we can expect to see China much more present on export market, mainly due to their low domestic demand, as I said earlier. In AMNS, we are overall 80-20 between domestic and export. On the 80% done with domestic, we are consistent and stable across some specific market segments with a regular presence on several key customers. There is no reason for us to change this as we are working with a long-term view. So it means we intend to continue to support our customers like we have done during these past years. There are parts in our business where some market segments are speculating. When this happens, of course, we are less consistent in terms of regularity, switching time to time volume to the export bucket. Just to mention that in the 20% done on export, we are first focused on Middle East. Now, let me come to the crucial question with the cost impact. I don't think that we have realized and we have integrated yet what is ahead of us. All the raw material costs are now moving up on a daily or weekly basis due to the event in Russia and Ukraine. And it is extremely difficult for us to have visibility and to give visibility to our customers. Just to give example, scrap now versus January has increased by more than 20%. Iron ore by 35%. The coal index, FOB Australia, is at plus 25% versus January. So it means that all the Indian steel producers in flat product will be impacted because they are all based on blast furnace routes. Gas energy has increased by 35%. The ferroalloys are all jumping by more than 25%, with in some cases more than 30 or even 50% for some of them. So the message is the high impact on our cost is there and will be there. And we are today even unable to calculate this impact as everything is moving on a daily basis. So sorry, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but this is the reality we are seeing. The events with Russia and Ukraine are creating, in fact, a lot of indirect impact, even for India, which are difficult for us today to assess. So I just wanted to give you an overview of the key challenges we are facing, but overall, and even with all these uncertainties, FY’22 should remain a year of growth for India. We clearly see that when we ask all our customers, how do they see the coming months? So even if there are some negatives, they are much more positive in reality than the negative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Legrix, for that comprehensive outlook on the global and Indian scenario, especially against the backdrop of the current challenges and also the global tensions. But nevertheless, signing off on a positive note. And now I invite our guest of honor, Mrs. Ruchika Chaudhry Govil, Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Steel, Government of India. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you to Steel Mint for having me over here to give some comments. But I think after Mr. Alain, Legrix has given us such a comprehensive view of what is happening in the world of steel, not only in the present circumstances, but what is expected in future. I will just take over to discuss what we in India as policy makers are worried about, how we perceive things to be and how we want to take it forward. These are difficult times, if I can say so. The unexpected seems to be the expected way to go. We've had the pandemic and now the global tensions of Russia. It makes prediction and possibilities so much more complex to deal with. But having said this, 2021 surprisingly turned out to be a good year for Indian steel makers. We saw a highest level production. The World Steel Association says we had done 118 million tons. That is the highest ever done. And I must compliment the steel producers of the country that in the adverse circumstances of the terrible Delta wave that we saw, the production still continued. And not only did the production continue, the steel producers contributed to the oxygen, and the oxygen contribution saved so many lives. So we must compliment all our steel producers for that. Going ahead, we don't know how long this pandemic, or now we call it endemic, is actually going to rear its head again and again, and what the implications of the global aggression that we are seeing of Russia, what it will play out. Things are getting further complex by the energy crisis and the raw material crisis that we are looking at. The prices, as Mr. Alain has talked about, we've seen have gone up tremendously, and we don't see them going down anywhere in the near future. This implies that the cost of production is going up tremendously, and the price of steel itself is going up exponentially. So it will have a deep impact on the consumers and how they perceive as these will, when do we see this price rise plateauing out, or whether we see it growing further. That is also a serious cause of concern that we are talking about. India wants to be an efficient and a competitive steel sector. It wants to be more of a global player, but with a huge potential of domestic demand. The focus for the country remains that the domestic projects that the government has been launching to increase its domestic demand. We've seen the Gati Shakti project that has recently been announced. We've talked about the National Infrastructure Pipeline. We talk about Awas Yojana. We talk about Nal Se Jal program. We talk a lot of infrastructure push. So there is definitely a lot of domestic demand that we look at. And the rising prices, nevertheless, I think these are important projects for the government where we will see a lot of demand coming. So I think the steel producers can rest that there will be a lot of absorption of whatever is produced here. In COVID times, we saw a very interesting thing that our exports actually went up. Now, this was when we saw our domestic demand slowing down, much to our surprise in the past 2 years. We've seen a good export push. This has arisen for multiple reasons, but whatever they are, we see in the realm of business that opportunities arise anytime, and the Indian steel producers have always grabbed these opportunities, kept up their production, whether for the domestic market or whether for the global market. India did well to export not only its finished products, but when an opportunity arose, even exported semis, but did not reduce its production. So therefore, opportunities for exports did well for the country in the past year, 2021. In H1 of 23, I think the potential will lie in both the areas of domestic consumption because of the projects that I just mentioned, and also because now the steel industry has a certain level of maturity to respond to the competitive pressures that it's. China, as Mr. Alain has mentioned, has in the past years seen reduced demand, but also reduced production because of its blue sky policies. It had reduced its production. Now, how it will respond in the next year, whether we will see increased production in the light of reduced consumption in that country, whether we will see increased exports, is something that will have to be played out, and we'll have to see during the H1 of 23. But while the production had gone down, Indian producers saw a export and did very well in that respect. Our cause of concern more is for the raw materials. Raw materials, whether it is coking coal, as was mentioned by Mr. Alain, we have seen astronomical rise from January of last year, 2021, to where we see it today. It is something which nobody had predicted to go in this fashion. But the way the climatic conditions exist in Australia, these are cause of concern. We see coking coal remaining high. That means that our cost of production, at least for the integrated steel, our 7 million ton scrap that we import is also a cause of concern because everybody is becoming protectionist about their scrap. Scrap flows are definitely reduced, and in future we are going to see a reduce of that. To counter that, the government of India has come out with the MORTH's end of life of vehicle policies. We have got a steel scrap recycling policy. We are hoping to generate more scrap, or whatever scrap that is there in the country, to tap into it, to get it into the production process, to recycle it. We talk more about resource efficiencies, more about circular economies. It is a focus area of the government. So we are hoping that scrap domestic generation will be better, and we will be able to supply more to the secondary sector as well as to the integrated sector. Scrap will also see its better production, better resources of scrap in the country. The government has focused itself into giving the required push for better production. We talk while I know the seminar is only talking about H1, the focus small term, medium term, and long term. For long term, I talk about the 2030. The government has been very focused that we need to increase our per capita consumption, and therefore the production of steel must reach the capacity of 300 million ton. Now, adding focus to that, the recently launched PLI scheme also talks about how in the next 5-7 years, we must have specialty steel. The focus of that is to reduce imports for the country. We talk about how the PLI scheme must do import substitution, and if there is a possibility to increase exports. So we talk about how India is a good investment in the country in the medium term. There's already talk which has started about talking about 2047. Where will we see the country? We talk about future expansion as well. But when we talk about all these factors, we have to focus on the unpredictables that we are seeing more and more, which were not so. Earlier, we used to only talk about steel being a cyclic industry. Now, add to the cyclic part of steel, we talk about how these other extraneous circumstances like COVID and aggressions are also complicating the steel stream. How the raw material price, the raw material securitization, which the country desperately needs, is also making the situation more complex. Mr. Alain talked about how we are hoping for a 2% growth of steel, that is a 40 million ton potential of exports. I think Indian steel industry is well equipped to deal with this if we have extra steel, you see, the first focus which we always feel is that the country has to meet its local demands because the country has so much happening for infrastructure currently. We don't see any waning of demand because of this, the push that is being given to the infrastructure sector. The budget itself also focused so tremendously on an infrastructure growth. We talk about capital expenditures happening. All capital expenditure talks about a steel demand only being up and up in the country. I know it might be at a higher cost because the price of steel, both long and flats, has gone up. But I think because we are so focused on a growth engine and capex and infrastructure being the growth engine, I think the demand in the country will be there. It's in a little bit of a realm of how we face these global challenges. I think a better understanding of that has been given by Mr. Alain. I just think that our steel industry is mature enough now to respond to most of these challenges and will find its way to deal with these challenges. I personally feel H1 will be a challenging time, but would not be a cause of concern. We talk about how we will grow. The emphasis in the near future, it has already started, is we have to talk about carbon emissions being reduced. I think after COP26, after the kind of direction he has laid, the industry is already focused as to how carbon emissions is going to be an area of focus. We will talk about green steel. Everybody's already engaging as to what all innovations are required, what all measures and steps needs to be taken. When we talk about 2030, it's limited, but when we are talking 2047, I would like to assure the House that that is going to be a focus area. So any challenges that EU would have in terms of carbon tax, any part which the challenge that come in terms of carbon emissions or carbon tax, I think the industry, not in the very near future, but in a little longer term, is getting equipped to deal. We are in discussions. We've been having a lot of talks in this regard, and I think we will see an improvement there. So with specialty steels and reduced carbon emissions and increased production, I think the steel industry is got the path well charted out, and we in the ministry here are willing to give any policy support, any narrative that needs to be taken forward. We would be happy to engage more. Steelmen have always been a very informed source, and you have always helped us in our policy decisions. Thank you so much for that. With WSA also, we've been engaging a lot. I think if there are challenges, working together with the industry, with the think tanks, we could overcome most of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. We would now like to ask a few questions to our esteemed speakers before we throw the floor open to our audiences. I have a question for Mrs. Govil first. Exports have evolved into a very important component for the industry. On the other hand, the PLI scheme is looking at lowering imports. So could there be any kind of action on import duties? We have seen imports have dropped, as Nitish showed in his presentation, have dropped 43% over the last 4 years. So is there a need somewhere to balance out the steel exim trade? Any policy decision on exports being mulled as well? If you could enlighten us.
In this, Madhumita, I would like to say, I think the government has been very clear when we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat. We've been talking about India is now a mature economy where with the required direction, a lot of production can happen domestically. We have a very robust steel sector. All the private steel sector, whether it is in the secondary sector or whether it is the integrated steel plants, we have a capacity to make a variety of steels. We talk about specialty steels to the billets and glooms that can be produced. So with that in mind, I think PLI scheme talks about how we now need to move gears, move to the next level. The government will support the specialty steel to be now melt and pour, made in the country, value addition, etc. in the country. I think the maturity of the steel sector is what's going to result in a lowered import. If we were to look at the imports which have so far be on multiple accounts. So far, I mean, whenever we analyze data of the past 2 years, we always have to take into account that consumption was a little warped in this year. So let's not look at only data of 19, 20, and 21. I think things still need to stabilize. But in the next 5 years, we are going to see a lot more variety of steel being produced within the country. But we would not like to take our manufacturing industry ever to take a hit. So I think that walking the thin line to balance the things, I think policymakers are very aware of that. I think everybody will be sensitive, but everybody needs to be also focused that India needs to produce a larger variety and grade of steels within the country. And we are hoping that will be achieved through the national steel and through the PLI scheme. Thank you.
While on the topic of PLI, I would like to also ask you, I mean, what sort of response have you received so far in terms of applications? And to what
yeah, I think it's premature to talk about that because today we are only on the 7th of March. We had a lot of stakeholder discussions when we were formulating the scheme. The scheme is open till the 29th of March. So I think, and the scheme has been tailor-made to the requirements of the industry, talking to the industry. So I'm sure a really good response. I think 3 weeks in advance or 4 weeks in advance, it's a bit early to talk about where we will see it go.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Legrix. The fourth quarter, Mr. Legrix, is usually the best period in terms of domestic demand. So from your perspective, how is demand like at present? And will it be better than what we saw in Q3?
As I said, what we see, it's since February, we have seen a very good recovery and a strong recovery from almost all the market segments. We do every month a market survey among our top 5 customers per market segment. And we have seen, and we look ahead with all our key customers, what do they have in their plan for the coming 2 months. So, as I said, we see a strong pull from all the market segments now. There are, of course, some exceptions, like if you take the two-wheelers, it's not so strong because they have some overstocked. The farm tractors are pretty low, but except that, everybody, all the market segments are very strong. And when we look ahead, it's very positive. The demand is there, and the demand is pulling very strong from all the market segments. You take pipe and tube, you take a large diameter pipe for infrastructure project, everything is there. You take construction, it's back on stream, if I can say like that. We are very strong on all the infrastructure linked to plate and the supply of plate, EV plates. So overall, if I see broadly, I do not see any specific market segment which is really weak looking ahead. So we have a very strong pull from and very good recovery. And for the coming months, same point.
We have a question from one of our delegates to Ruchika ma'am. How much are India's domestic steel production and exports expected to increase or decrease?
Are you talking about exports or are you talking about production?
This delegate is talking about India's domestic steel production and exports. To what extent are they expected to increase or decrease? How much are imports expected to increase or decrease?
So while we talk about exports, I think I would let the private sector respond, because you see that is pretty much a response to how the rest of the global players also play up. I must say that when we talked about it in 21 and when we talk about it 22, much to our surprise, we had a very good exports, and it was driven. Our semi-finished semis actually being exported more. So this is going to be very much how it's played out, by the global players. I think Mr. Alain might be more equipped to deal with this question because they monitor the business parameters. We are always more focused on domestic consumption. I think we are more focused in the country that our per capita consumption of steel goes up. All the infrastructure projects, all the construction projects get the adequate steel for consumption in the country. It is only thereafter that any extra amount could be exported. Export focus is more by the private sector if they are interested. We, on a priority, would like domestic industry, domestic consumption to actually be more enhanced. Mr. Alain may like to answer that question.
Yeah, just to complete, and I will answer only on flat product because I'm not really a specialist on long, but on flat imports we foresee the import remaining stable, going down, of course, step by step, but imports are roughly stable at 250,000 tons per month. The key topic, I think, it's export. Export flat last year was at 9 million tons. We can think that there is a huge opportunity to go to Europe outside due to the attractivity of the price. I don't think it's too soon, but I don't think that we will see big change this year in terms of level of export because first, as I see globally, we are all focused on Indian market to support the Indian growth. So I do not see tomorrow, I could look a customer and saying, sorry, I cannot supply you because I go to export. Doesn't make any sense. So we are clearly focused on to support the growth of the economy in India first. And second, we have to be very careful with the figures because when you compare the net result of your export at time of shipment versus the domestic price is recovering in terms of price increase. And it's not always obvious that the export are much better than the domestic market sales. They are above, of course, due to the attractivity of the price, but we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful with this. So overall, I think that this year, in terms of export, will be roughly at the same level than last year.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Then, sorry to add one thing. As I said, it's really too soon, meaning this event started 10 days back. So it's very difficult to make some assessment. I was saying some question on the screen in terms of impact on the demand in Europe. In ArcelorMittal, I had some discussion last week. We even don't know yet what will be really the impact in terms of on the demand side. So it's really too soon to assess this.
Mr. Legrix, I have a question. So, what is your outlook on the demand from the Indian auto sector in particular? And, what kind of signals are emerging with regards to the semiconductor chip shortage issue that has been the talk of the town?
What we see from all our customers, it's first, the chip shortage is solving step by step. It takes some time. The backlog of orders in terms of production is still there and very important. But what is more important, it's the outlook for FY’22 in terms of production is excellent. All the OEMs are giving us some very strong figures in terms of production. So commercial vehicle, we have seen clearly a change since Feb, and the feedback that we are getting from our customer is excellent. So the outlook regarding all the auto segment, I will say, is really positive for this year.
Ma'am, I have a question for you. The Ministry of Steel had inked a deal with Russia's energy ministry to increase Russian coking coal supply to India by, I think, up to 40 million tons. Now, when were the first consignments supposed to land? And do you see any disruptions in the short to medium term, considering the Russia-Ukraine crisis?
Madhumita, I'm sorry, I will not be able to give you specific details on this. The ministry was involved only in the policy, in getting the MOU and to getting the parties together as a potential. Thereafter, it is each of the integrated steel plants which was to work out a schedule and when they were to receive it. At my end, I am not monitoring that. If you want specific details, maybe we could go a little deeper and find out in the ministry. But offhand, I'm sorry, I would not.
Nitish, would you like to ask any other question?
Yes, I have a question from Mr. Legrix. So, sir, how do you foresee the international flat prices unfolding in the next couple of quarters?
Can you give me the crystal ball, please? So now, what I think the first point, what we will see in the coming, I will say 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's what will happen with the quota decision in Europe. Quota or non-quota. If the quota remains, China going back to export, the export market will be more competitive with less business opportunities. So I think the international price will go up, of course, because the FOB China will go up due to the cost impact on raw material, due to the fact that they go back to export. But they when you still have the quota, the price will be, you will have Europe with excessive high price, but more competition, less opportunity and more competition. When the quota is open, no more quota, so steel flow will go, you will have a better balance, in fact, on the different markets. But I don't think it will change anything for the Indian mills overall, meaning that export market will be there. Because again, when you take this 40 million ton growth, many continents are not exporter, like US. The economic activity in US will be very strong. There are some flow of export which will go to US. We can think about this. So the international market should remain high, but all this behind, it's very difficult to predict because we don't know how long these events in Ukraine and Russia are going to last. The key point, and nobody knows, is this one, meaning is it short term or is it long term? Of course, there are some structural change, but I have seen in our group many discussions taking place last week. We are really not in the fog, but it's very difficult to predict, to make some. So we are doing some scenario, of course. So overall, we think that the international market price will remain high with Chinese back. But even when the Chinese are back on the international market, they will be back with higher FOB China because they are like India. They will be and they are impacted with the cost impact, like everybody.
Okay.
I think that was the last question we can accommodate for this afternoon. We have to bring this webinar to a close. Again, a big thank you to our speakers, Mr. Ruchika Govil and Mr. Alain Legrix, and to our viewers for joining in. And we hope you'll enjoy the session as much as we did. We would also like to extend our gratitude to the Ministry of Steel and the Indian Steel Association for their valuable support. Thank you to our sponsors, NMDC and JSW Steel once again.